He dared me, and I said yes before I even thought it through. Now, I'm standing at the mouth of a corn maze that stretches into the dark, the air thick with the smell of earth and the faint rustle of stalks swaying in the night wind. The last light of sunset bleeds away, and the shadows grow longer, wrapping around me like a secret I'm not supposed to keep. My heart beats hard, not just from the challenge, but from him. From the way his eyes held mine when he whispered those words, a smirk playing at the edge of his lips, asterisk, no one ever finds secret lovers. Asterisk, I told myself this was just a game. But even before I stepped inside, I knew this was going to be more than that. He dared me, and I said yes before I even thought about the weight of that word. It slipped out of my mouth too fast, like a secret I couldn't take back. Now I was here, at the narrow entrance of the corn maze, where the last streaks of gold and pink bled from the sky, swallowed by the tall, whispering walls of stalks. The air smelled damp, heavy with the scent of soil that had been turned and trampled by countless footsteps. But in this moment, it felt like the world had shrunk to just me, him, and the endless, twisting corridors waiting ahead. I could feel his presence behind me before he spoke, the quiet shuffle of his shoes on the packed dirt, the warmth of his breath hitting the back of my neck in quick, uneven bursts. My heart picked up, not from fear, but from the kind of anticipation that sits low in your stomach and spreads like heat through your chest. I turned slightly, catching his gaze in the soft wash of fading daylight. His eyes glimmered with mischief, but there was something else there too, something deeper, an unspoken question, maybe even a warning. He leaned forward, close enough that I could feel the faint graze of his lips near my ear when he whispered, "No one ever finds secret lovers in here." The words wrapped around me like a dare and a promise all at once. I wanted to smile, to throw back a teasing remark, but the truth was my throat felt tight. I just nodded and stepped inside, pushing past the first wall of corn into the darkness. The sound changed immediately, the world becoming smaller, quieter. Every movement made the dry leaves hiss like they were talking about us. The path under my feet was narrow, uneven, and as I walked deeper, I could hear him following, just far enough behind that I couldn't see him unless I turned. The maze felt alive, its walls bending and leaning as if they knew we didn't belong. The air cooled quickly, and the sky above was almost gone, replaced by jagged slices of deep blue that broke through the spaces where the stalks didn't quite meet. My heartbeat slowed into a heavy, steady thud, and every step felt like it was pulling me further into something I couldn't escape. I thought of how it started, how he leaned against the fence earlier that evening, the fading sun painting his skin in warm light, how he looked at me like I was the only thing worth noticing in the entire world. He told me about the maze in this low, conspiratorial tone, as if it was a place where rules didn't matter, where people could disappear into each other without anyone seeing. I didn't think he was serious at first, but then he smiled in that way he does, slow and knowing, and asked if I was brave enough to prove him right. I said yes, not because I wanted to win some challenge, but because I wanted to know what it would feel like to be lost with him, away from everything else. Now, as we moved further inside, I could feel the weight of that decision pressing against me. He was close again, the sound of his footsteps syncing with mine, the faint brush of his fingers grazing my arm in the narrow path. I wanted to reach back, to grab his hand, but something held me still, a need to keep the tension alive, to let the air between us stretch until it almost hurt. The corn seemed to press in tighter, the dry leaves scratching against my jacket as we turned another corner. There was no map, no signs, just instinct and the faint pull of him behind me. Every so often, I would hear his voice, low and amused, telling me to keep going, that we weren't even close to the center yet. I didn't know if he meant the maze or whatever this thing was between us. At one point, I stopped, closing my eyes for a moment just to listen. I could hear the wind moving through the stalks, the faint creak of their stems bending. Somewhere far off, laughter echoed, maybe from others lost in their own games, but it felt miles away. Here, in this narrow space, it was just us. He stepped closer until I could feel the heat of him at my back. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The tension hung between us like a thread pulled taut, ready to snap. Then, without a word, he brushed past me, his shoulder grazing mine, and started walking ahead. The sudden loss of his closeness made the cool air rush in around me, sharp and empty. I followed, my eyes fixed on the faint sway of his frame in the dim light. Somewhere in my chest, the thrill of the dare tangled with something softer, something that felt dangerously close to longing. The maze curved again, and when I looked up, he was gone. I froze, the dirt path stretching out ahead of me in two directions, both empty. My breath caught somewhere between my ribs and throat, a quick, uneven flutter that refused to settle. I turned slowly, the stalks whispering against my sleeves as if they were telling secrets I wasn't supposed to hear. "Hey," I called out, my voice sounding strange in the stillness, too thin, like it didn't belong here. No answer. I tried again, louder this time, but the sound only seemed to get swallowed by the maze. A ripple of unease slid down my spine, making me grip the fabric of my jacket tighter. It wasn't fear in the way you feel when you're in danger, it was sharper, more personal, the kind that comes when something you want so badly slips just out of reach. My feet moved before I even thought about it, turning down the left path. The ground here was softer, a little damp, and I could smell the faint, sweet rot of fallen corn husks beneath my shoes. The air had cooled more since we entered, and every step seemed to push me deeper into a pocket of night. I could hear my own breathing more than anything else, and it made the absence of his sound even worse. Somewhere between the rustle of the stalks, I thought I caught the faintest trace of laughter, a soft, muffled sound, just for a second, but it was too far away, and the wind carried it off before I could tell if it was real. I slowed down, pressing my hand to the nearest stalk for balance. The edges of its leaves scratched against my palm, a rough, dry texture that made me pull back quickly. My fingers curled into my chest, as if holding myself together might keep the unease from spreading. My thoughts kept drifting back to earlier in the evening, before the maze, when we stood at the edge of it and he leaned in, close enough for me to smell the faint salt of his skin and whatever soap he used that morning. He said it so easily, no one ever finds secret lovers here, like it was both a promise and a challenge, and maybe even a confession. Back then, it felt exciting, like stepping into something thrilling but harmless. Now, it was starting to feel like stepping into a dream where the path kept shifting every time I thought I knew where I was going. I tried to listen again, holding my breath until the quiet pressed in around me. There, off to my right, something brushed against the stalks. My chest tightened with hope, and I pushed toward it, forcing my way down a narrower path where the corn leaned in close enough to scrape against my shoulders. I followed the sound until it stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I wanted to call his name again, but something made me hesitate, as if speaking might break whatever fragile thread was keeping us connected in this twisting place. I kept moving, my pace slower now, each step careful, deliberate. The moonlight barely reached this far in, leaving the path ahead in shadow. I imagined him just around the next turn, leaning casually against a wall of corn with that same half-smile he had earlier, eyes daring me to admit I'd missed him. My throat tightened at the thought. I rounded the corner quickly, almost stumbling from the rush of expectation, but the space was empty, the path stretching on in two directions again. My chest sank, and the hollow ache in it deepened. I turned left, not because it made sense, but because it felt like the direction he would take. The air here was warmer, carrying the faint scent of hay and earth. I walked faster now, my hands brushing against the stalks on either side, as if I could feel my way toward him. My ears strained for any sound, footsteps, breathing, anything, but the maze seemed determined to keep him from me. My mind began to play tricks, layering in moments from earlier, the way his fingers lingered just a fraction too long when he handed me his phone to take a picture, the warmth in his voice when he said my name, the glint in his eyes when he dared me to come inside. I clung to those memories like they were breadcrumbs, guiding me through a place that felt endless. And then, without warning, I felt it, warmth against my arm, a solid presence just close enough to make me stop dead in my tracks. My breath caught again, sharper this time. I turned, my heart hammering hard against my ribs, unsure if it was him or if the maze had finally decided to let me lose myself completely. It was him. The moment my eyes adjusted to the dim light, the shape in front of me came into focus, the familiar curve of his jaw, the faint shadow of stubble, the way his mouth tilted like he was on the verge of laughing. Relief hit me in a wave so strong it almost made my knees give out, and for a second all I could do was stare. He stood there like he had been waiting for me, though I couldn't tell for how long. My lips parted to speak, to tell him he'd scared me, but before I could say anything, he stepped closer, his eyes locked on mine, and that smirk spread into something softer, something almost tender. "Find me," he said quietly, as if the words were meant only for me and the night. The sound of his voice curled through me like heat, making it hard to focus on the narrow path we stood in. He leaned in a fraction, his breath brushing my cheek, then took a step back and turned away, disappearing into the maze before I could react. My heart jumped, part frustration, part thrill, and I followed without thinking, my feet catching on the uneven dirt as I tried to keep up with the faint sound of his movement ahead. The maze twisted sharply, forcing me to slow down, and I caught brief flashes of him, his shoulder turning a corner, the back of his head disappearing between the corn. Every time I thought I was close enough to reach out, he slipped away again, like the maze itself was helping him hide. My chest tightened with a mix of amusement and exasperation. He was turning this into a game, but it felt like more than that. There was a current running under it, something charged and unspoken. Each step I took wasn't just about catching up to him, it was about proving to myself that I could. I rounded another bend and stopped. The path here opened slightly into a small clearing where the dirt was covered with bits of hay that crunched softly under my shoes. The air was warmer in this spot, carrying the faint, sweet smell of dried corn mixed with the sharp edge of autumn. He was there, sitting casually on the ground with his knees bent, one hand propped behind him, the other resting loosely on his thigh. His eyes lifted to mine, and the playful glint I expected wasn't there. Instead, there was something more serious, more raw, as if the game had faded for a moment. I crossed the space between us and sank down beside him, close enough that our knees brushed. The contact sent a quiet shiver through me, and for a long time neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The quiet around us was thick and private, broken only by the faint rustle of stalks swaying above. I glanced at him, catching the way his gaze drifted toward me before darting away, almost shyly, which was unlike him. It made my chest ache in a way I wasn't prepared for. I wanted to reach for his hand, to close the small space between us entirely, but before I could, he stood abruptly, brushing hay from his palms. "Come on," he said, his voice back to that playful tone, but there was still something lingering underneath it. I followed as he started walking again, this time keeping pace with him instead of trailing behind. The path narrowed quickly, and the corn pressed in on both sides, forcing our arms to brush with every step. The closeness made my thoughts scatter, and I had to focus on my breathing just to keep my voice steady when I asked where we were going. He didn't answer, just looked over his shoulder with a grin before taking another sharp turn. The ground here was softer, almost spongy, and I could feel the cool dampness through the soles of my shoes. The moonlight filtered through a break in the stalks ahead, casting pale stripes across the path. I tried to match his pace, but then he sped up, slipping around another bend, and when I turned the corner after him, he was gone again. This time the emptiness hit harder, like I'd been left in a room where someone had just walked out and taken all the warmth with them. The night felt bigger, the maze louder, every rustle and whisper suddenly magnified. I stood there for a moment, the game suddenly feeling like a test I didn't know how to pass, my pulse beating faster with each second I couldn't see him. Night had fully claimed the maze now, swallowing the last traces of twilight until there was nothing but the dim silver spill of the moon breaking through in fragments between the swaying stalks. The air had grown colder, thick with the earthy scent of soil and the dry, papery perfume of the corn leaves that brushed against me with every step. I stood in the middle of the path, turning slowly, trying to decide which way to go, but each direction looked the same, narrow corridors of shadow that seemed to stretch into forever. My chest felt tight, not just from the chill but from the sudden awareness that I was alone again. The game had stopped being playful a while ago, though I wasn't sure when that shift happened. At first, chasing him through the maze had been a spark, something wild and electric, but now it felt like chasing something I couldn't afford to lose. My shoes scuffed against the dirt as I chose a path at random, my fingers grazing the rough edges of the stalks like they might somehow guide me toward him. Every rustle, every snap of a dry stem made my pulse quicken. Sometimes I swore I could hear his footsteps just ahead, quick and light, but when I hurried forward the sound vanished, leaving me with only my own breath to fill the silence. The maze was alive in its own way, breathing with me, closing in and opening up without any logic I could follow. I thought about turning back, but I didn't even know what back was anymore. The further I walked, the more I realized how deep we had gone, how far from the world outside. The night had a way of making things feel endless, as if the boundaries of this place no longer existed. I remembered the way he had looked at me earlier, his eyes lit with something I couldn't quite name, and how his voice had curled around that dare like it was a secret he wanted to share. Maybe that was why I kept moving, because I wasn't ready to let the connection between us dissolve into the cold night air. The ground here was uneven, roots jutting up in places that made me stumble more than once. My hands reached out instinctively to steady myself against the walls of corn, but the leaves scratched at my skin, sharp and dry, as if pushing me forward instead of letting me stop. I whispered his name under my breath, almost afraid to say it too loudly, as though the maze might hear and decide to keep him from me. My voice sounded small, swallowed instantly by the space around me. The cold had started to seep into my fingers, numbing them, but I kept walking, kept hoping the next turn would reveal him standing there, smiling like he'd been waiting all along. Instead, the paths twisted endlessly, sometimes narrowing so much I had to turn my shoulders sideways to squeeze through. My heart was starting to pound harder now, a mix of exhaustion and something sharper, fear, maybe, but also the ache of wanting him close again. I thought about the first time we met, how easy it had been to talk to him, how quickly he made me feel like I'd known him for years. That same warmth was what I was chasing now, buried somewhere in this shifting maze. I came to a fork in the path and hesitated, closing my eyes for a moment to listen. The wind sighed through the stalks, carrying with it the faint creak of stems swaying against one another, but nothing else. I chose the left side this time, my steps quicker now, almost desperate. My mind kept replaying his voice in my head, soft, teasing, dangerous in the way it made me want more, and each echo drove me further on. Then, without warning, my foot caught on something and I pitched forward, hitting the ground hard. The dirt was cool and gritty against my palms, and when I pushed myself up, the sharp scent of crushed corn husks filled my nose. For a moment, I stayed there on my knees, breathing hard, the sting of the fall reminding me just how fragile this little adventure really was. My throat tightened as I realized how easy it would be to lose him entirely in here. The game, the dare, the laughter we'd started with, it all felt distant now, replaced by the raw need to find him before the maze swallowed us whole. I brushed the dirt from my hands and forced myself back onto my feet, my muscles tense, my eyes scanning the darkness ahead for any sign of him. Somewhere out there, he was moving too, and I needed to believe that he was looking for me just as hard as I was looking for him. The path ahead bent sharply to the right, and as I turned the corner, my breath caught in my throat. He was there, just a few feet away, a shadow against the faint silver glow of moonlight that broke through a gap in the stalks above. For a moment, I thought I was imagining him, a trick of exhaustion and longing, but then he shifted, his shoulders slumping slightly as if a weight had been sitting on them all this time. His head tilted toward me, and I saw his eyes, wide, almost startled, as though he wasn't expecting to see me either. Relief hit me so suddenly that I felt dizzy, the edges of my vision softening for a second. I took a hesitant step forward, my shoes crunching over the brittle husk scattered across the dirt, and he didn't move away. Instead, he exhaled, a sound heavy enough to make me stop in my tracks. "I thought I lost you," he said quietly, his voice low and unsteady in a way I had never heard from him before. It wasn't teasing now, and it wasn't part of the dare. It was raw, stripped down, the kind of confession that slips out before you can decide if you should hold it back. Something in my chest pulled tight, and I crossed the space between us without thinking. Up close, I could see the faint tension in his jaw, the way his hands curled and uncurled at his sides as if he didn't know what to do with them. I wanted to tell him I had felt the same, that every step without him had been heavy, but the words tangled in my throat. So I did the only thing I could think to do, I reached for him. My fingers brushed his wrist first, the skin warm despite the chill in the air, and when he didn't pull away, I let my hand slide down until it found his. His fingers tightened instantly around mine, and the connection was so strong it made my pulse race. We stood there for a long moment, the silence between us thick but not empty. It was filled with the quiet things we weren't saying, the ones that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. His thumb moved slowly over the back of my hand, and I could feel the weight of the night pressing in around us, but it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't thinking about the maze or the paths twisting endlessly out of sight. I was thinking about how close he was, how his breathing matched mine, how our bodies seemed to lean toward each other without either of us deciding to move. When he finally looked up, his gaze held mine, steady and certain in a way that made my stomach flip. "If someone finds us," he said, his voice softer now, "then they'll see what love looks like." The words hit me like a spark, lighting something deep inside me that I didn't even realize I had been carrying. I felt my lips part, ready to answer, but nothing came out. Instead, I just held on tighter, as though my grip could keep us tethered in this fragile, perfect moment. The wind moved through the maze, rustling the stalks like an unseen crowd murmuring around us, and he took a small step forward, closing the last inch of space between us. Our shoulders brushed, then our arms, until we were standing so close that the heat from his body seeped into mine. For the first time since stepping into the maze, I felt steady. He glanced down the path ahead, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Come on," he murmured, his fingers still wrapped around mine. "We'll get through this together." And just like that, we began to walk side by side. The path wound sharply, narrowing in places so that the stalks brushed against our arms, but we didn't let go. Even when we had to turn sideways to squeeze through tighter spaces, our hands stayed locked, our steps moving in sync. It felt different now, not like a chase, but like a journey we had chosen to take together. I noticed the little things, the way his thumb would press gently into my palm every so often, the small tilt of his head when he glanced at me, the way his laughter, when it came, was quiet but genuine. The maze still felt alive, still whispered and shifted in ways I couldn't explain, but its presence no longer seemed threatening. It was just the backdrop to the rhythm we'd found in each other's company. At one point, we passed a break in the stalks where moonlight spilled onto the dirt like a pale spotlight, and he paused there, his gaze lifting toward the sky. I followed his eyes and saw the stars peeking through, sharp and clear against the black. The sight made my chest feel lighter, and I realized that I wasn't thinking about finding the exit anymore. I was thinking about how, for the first time in hours, maybe longer, I felt like I had already arrived somewhere I wanted to stay. We moved on, the moonlight fading behind us, our path swallowed once again by shadow, but I didn't mind. His hand was still in mine, and that was enough. The maze seemed to breathe with us as we moved, its walls shifting in subtle ways, the tall stalks leaning closer, then swaying back as if they were alive and listening. The narrow dirt path ahead glistened faintly in the moonlight that filtered through scattered gaps above, silver light pooling in broken shapes across the ground. Our footsteps crunched softly over scattered husks, the sound swallowed quickly by the whisper of the wind sliding between the leaves. His hand stayed in mine, our fingers locked with a grip that felt almost desperate, as though letting go might mean losing each other to the maze again. The air was heavier here, warmer than the rest of the night, carrying a faint sweetness that made me feel like we had stepped into another part of the world. Every so often, I would feel the brush of his shoulder against mine, not from the path forcing us together, but because he didn't move away. The silence between us had changed. It no longer felt like the fragile pause before someone speaks, but more like the deep, quiet understanding that exists when words are unnecessary. Still, there was something on my tongue I couldn't keep in. I told him that I had always believed secret lovers stayed hidden because love was safer that way, easier to protect in the dark where no one could touch it. My voice was soft, almost uncertain, but in the quiet it sounded louder than I meant it to. He didn't look at me right away. Instead, his thumb traced slowly over the back of my hand, the rhythm deliberate, as though he was thinking about what to say. When he finally glanced at me, his eyes held a steadiness that made my chest tighten. "Maybe love hides because it's scared," he said, his voice low and sure. "But maybe it shouldn't." The words sank into me, deeper than I expected, leaving me quiet for a long moment. The path ahead twisted sharply, forcing us to step closer, our bodies brushing as we turned. The corn here grew thicker, the leaves arching overhead until the sky disappeared entirely. Without the moonlight, the darkness pressed in heavier, but I didn't feel lost. His grip on my hand was enough to guide me, each gentle pull forward a reassurance that we were moving together. I started to notice the sounds around us more, the way the stalks seemed to creak and sigh, the faint rustle that followed us like a whisper, the occasional snap of a stem breaking under our feet. It was almost as if the maze was speaking in its own language, urging us deeper, telling us we were on the right path. The air shifted again, cooler now, and I could smell the sharp tang of damp soil. A soft wind drifted through the narrow passage, carrying a sound that almost resembled a voice, but when I turned my head to listen, it faded. He squeezed my hand lightly, drawing me back into step with him. We walked for what felt like forever, time slipping in a way I couldn't measure anymore. At one point, the path widened into a small clearing, the ground scattered with dry leaves that crunched under our feet. He stopped there, pulling me gently to a halt. The stalks surrounding the clearing swayed in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, and the faintest shimmer of light managed to slip through the canopy above. It painted his face in a way that made my breath catch, soft shadows, bright edges, a glow that seemed to hold every secret we had been keeping. We stood there without speaking, just looking at each other, and I realized that the maze wasn't just a place anymore. It had become part of the way we were seeing each other, stripping away the noise of the outside world until all that was left was this raw, unguarded space between us. He stepped closer then, so close that I could feel the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. My own breath fell into sync with his, the small distance between us disappearing until our foreheads touched. The moment was weightless, the kind of stillness that feels like it could stretch on forever. I didn't move, didn't want to. The maze could close in completely, and I think I would have stayed there, locked in that quiet with him, if he hadn't eventually pulled back. He didn't let go of my hand though. Without a word, we started moving again, the path ahead narrowing once more, forcing us to press close as we walked. The darkness didn't seem as heavy now, and the whispering of the stalks felt less like a warning and more like encouragement, as if the maze itself wanted to see us through. Every step felt deliberate, guided not by sight but by the steady pull of his hand and the quiet certainty that, wherever this ended, we would reach it together. The path began to slope ever so slightly downward, though the ground was still firm beneath our feet. It was the kind of change you only notice when you've been walking long enough to feel it in your legs, a subtle shift that made me wonder if the maze was leading us to some hidden center rather than toward an exit. The air here was thicker, almost damp, carrying the earthy smell of roots and rain-soaked soil even though the night had been dry. The walls of corn seemed taller than before, the stalks leaning in so close that their leaves occasionally brushed against my arms like soft, deliberate touches. He walked just ahead of me now, still holding my hand, his grip unwavering but gentler, as if he was aware of how tired I was becoming. His thumb moved in slow circles against my skin, grounding me in a way the maze couldn't undo. I realized then that the sound of our footsteps was no longer alone. There was something faint, like a heartbeat, but it wasn't coming from either of us. It was a low, rhythmic pulse that seemed to hum through the ground itself. I slowed without meaning to, and he stopped immediately, turning to look at me. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He nodded once, his brows furrowing, but he didn't look afraid. If anything, he looked as though he had expected it. "It's the maze," he said simply, like that explained everything. We stood there for a moment, listening. The sound grew stronger, the beat syncing almost perfectly with the thrum in my chest, until I couldn't tell which was mine and which belonged to the earth. He tugged gently at my hand and began walking again, and I followed, letting him lead me toward the sound. The path curved sharply to the left and opened into another clearing, this one much larger than the last, its center marked by a circle of crushed stalks, as though something had once rested there. Moonlight spilled freely here, unhindered by any canopy, and in its glow, the space felt both sacred and dangerous. I could feel the pulse more strongly now, vibrating through my shoes, and when I stepped into the circle, it was as if the air itself shifted. It was warmer, thicker, wrapping around me in an almost protective way. He let go of my hand for the first time in what felt like hours and stepped into the center with me. For a moment, I panicked at the loss of contact, but then he turned toward me, his eyes reflecting the pale light in a way that made it impossible to look away. "This," he said softly, "is where no one ever finds them." His words hit me like a secret I had been waiting to hear, and I understood instantly what he meant. The stories, the whispers, the lovers who hid here, not because they were afraid, but because this place belonged only to them. It wasn't about being lost. It was about choosing to stay hidden in a space where the world couldn't follow. My chest felt tight as I stepped closer, drawn to him as though the pulse in the earth was pulling us together. He reached for me then, both hands warm as they closed around mine, and something in his touch felt final, not an ending, but a sealing. The night air wrapped around us, the corn rustling faintly at the edges of the clearing like witnesses too far away to interfere. Neither of us spoke, but our silence said everything. We were here, and we had found the place where secret lovers stayed, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. When his arms slid around me, I let myself sink into them completely, my cheek resting against his shoulder, the steady beat of his heart matching the rhythm beneath our feet. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about leaving the maze at all. The air in the clearing felt still, as though the world beyond the maze had stopped moving. We stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other, the night stretching endlessly around us. His warmth seeped into me, steady and grounding, and I felt the slow rhythm of his breath against my cheek. Somewhere far off, a breeze moved through the corn, but here in the center it was quiet, almost sacred. I didn't want to break that silence, yet I knew the maze would not hold us forever. There was an unspoken truth between us now, something neither of us could have imagined when we first stepped inside. This wasn't just about a dare anymore, it was about finding something neither of us knew we had been searching for. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes catching the pale light and holding it like they were meant to. "We can leave," he said softly, as if testing the weight of the words. I searched his face, looking for hesitation, but all I found was the same steady calm he had carried through every turn of the maze. My chest ached with the thought of stepping away from this place, from the strange magic it held, yet I knew we couldn't live in its walls forever. I nodded, but I didn't let go of him just yet. Instead, I memorized the way he felt in that moment, the faint scent of his skin, the warmth of his hands, the way his gaze didn't waver. When we finally did move, it was slow, deliberate, like we were afraid of disturbing something fragile. We stepped out of the circle together, our fingers entwined once more, and as soon as we crossed its edge the air seemed to shift. The heartbeat beneath our feet softened until it was just a faint memory, the warmth fading into the cool night. The path ahead was narrow again, winding away from the clearing, but it felt less intimidating now. We walked in silence, though it was not the same silence we had shared before. This one was heavier with meaning, comfortable in a way that made each step feel certain. The corn seemed to part more easily for us now, the turns less confusing, as if the maze had decided it was done keeping us. The moon hung low, brushing silver across the path, guiding us forward without hurry. I realized I wasn't afraid of losing my way anymore. Even if the paths split again, even if the darkness thickened, I knew we'd still be together. After what felt like an hour, the first whisper of open space appeared ahead, a faint light spilling through the stalks, cool and blue like the world outside was calling us back. We stepped toward it, the air growing lighter with each pace. When we finally emerged from the maze, the night was wide and endless above us, stars scattered like secrets across the sky. I turned to look back, expecting to see the maze looming behind us, but it seemed smaller now, quieter, as if it had folded itself back into the earth, waiting for the next two souls who dared to get lost inside. He squeezed my hand, drawing my attention back to him, and there was a small, knowing smile on his lips. No words were needed. Everything we had felt inside the maze was still between us, carried in the way we stood close, in the warmth that lingered in our joined hands. We walked away together, the cool grass bending beneath our steps, the sound of the world returning little by little, crickets, the distant hum of the road, the gentle rustle of leaves. But beneath it all, I could still feel that faint echo from the maze, like a secret heartbeat, reminding me that what we had found in there wasn't bound to its walls. It was ours now, to carry wherever we went, no matter how far we walked from the place where no one ever finds secret lovers. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who needs to feel this connection, and subscribe for more emotional LGBTQ love stories that stay with you long after they end. Your support helps us create more moments like this, so join our journey and be part of the love that dares to be found.